Imagine living in a time when you had to step out of your truck in the freezing rain just to turn a dial on the front wheels, and when shifting gears meant working a lever mounted right on the steering column. Pickup trucks used to be full of features like these, clever solutions that made sense in their day. But every one of them disappeared for a reason, and a few of those reasons might surprise you. Today we take a look at 10 old truck features that have faded into history. Before air conditioning found its way into pickup cabs, vent windows were how drivers stayed cool on the road. These were the small triangular panes of glass mounted at the front edge of the door windows, and they pivoted open on a little chrome hinge. Sometimes people called them wing windows or quarter vents. The idea first appeared back in the 1930s, when General Motors introduced what it called no-draft ventilation, and the design spread across the industry within a few years. By angling that little pane of glass, a driver could scoop fresh air into the cab and aim it right at his face without getting blasted by a full open window. On a hot summer day, cracking the vent window just right created a steady breeze through the whole cab, and it worked even at low speeds around town. Farmers and delivery drivers loved them because they could keep air moving while rain stayed out, and smokers used them to flick ashes without rolling the whole window down. Truck makers kept vent windows around longer than car makers did, and you could still find them on some American pickups into the 1980s and even the early 1990s. But air conditioning became affordable and common, and engineers learned that those little panes created wind noise and drag that hurt fuel economy. They also added cost, since each vent window meant extra glass, hinges, latches, and seals on every single door. Thieves had also figured out that a vent window latch was the easiest way to break into a locked vehicle, which did not help the feature's reputation. One by one, manufacturers smoothed them out of their designs, and the door glass became a single solid piece. Today, when you see that little triangle of glass on an old truck at a car show, you are looking at the original air conditioning, and plenty of old-timers will tell you it worked better than the modern kind. But the vent window only cooled your face. The next feature shaped the entire layout of the cab. Long before floor shifters and automatics took over, many pickups came with a setup that drivers called 3 on the tree. This was a 3-speed manual transmission with the shift lever mounted on the steering column instead of the floor. The lever sat just behind the steering wheel, and shifting followed a simple H pattern. You pulled the lever towards you and down for first gear, pushed up and away for second, and pulled straight down for third. It sounds complicated, but drivers of the era could work that column shifter without ever thinking about it, steering with one hand and shifting smoothly with the other. The whole point of the design was space. With no shift lever sticking up out of the floor, the cab floor stayed flat and open, which made room for a full bench seat and 3 people sitting side by side. It also made it easier to slide across the cab and exit from either door, which mattered on a busy farm or a crowded job site. Column-shifted manuals were everywhere from the 1940s through the 1960s, in family sedans and work trucks alike. Learning to drive 3 on the tree was practically a rite of passage for a generation of American teenagers, usually taught in a dusty field by a patient father or an impatient older brother. But as engines got stronger and buyers wanted 4- and 5-speed transmissions, the column linkage became a limitation, and floor shifters and automatics steadily took over. By the late 1980s, the last column-shifted manuals disappeared from American trucks, and an entire driving skill faded away with them. And the column shifter was not the only control hiding somewhere strange. Here is a feature that confuses almost everyone born after a certain year. On old trucks, the headlight dimmer switch was not on the steering column at all. It was a small metal button on the floorboard, up in the far left corner, near the driver's left foot. To switch between low beams and high beams, you simply pressed that button with the toe of your boot and heard a satisfying click. The floor-mounted dimmer switch became standard equipment in the 1920s and 1930s, and it stayed there for roughly half a century. The logic was actually pretty sound. Your hands were busy with the steering wheel and the shifter, but your left foot usually had nothing to do except work the clutch now and then, so engineers gave it a job. Drivers of the era could flash their high beams for an oncoming car without moving their hands an inch. The trouble was that the switch lived in the dirtiest, wettest spot in the whole cab. Mud, snow, and slush from the driver's boots dripped onto it every day. And over the years, the contacts corroded and the switch wore out. Carpet also became more common in truck cabs, and the button had a way of hiding down in the pile where it was hard to find at night. During the 1970s and 1980s, manufacturers moved the dimmer function up to the turn signal stalk on the steering column, where it remains today. The floor button quietly vanished, and now it mostly survives as a trick question. Hand a modern driver the keys to a 1960s pickup at dusk, and watch how long it takes them to find the high beams. But at least the dimmer switch lets you stay in your seat. The next feature made you get out of the truck entirely. Four-wheel drive used to demand a lot more from the driver, and nothing proves it like manual locking hubs. On older four-wheel drive pickups, the front wheels were not permanently connected to the front axle. Each front wheel had a chrome hub in the center, with a small dial marked lock and free. When you wanted four-wheel drive, you stopped the truck, got out, walked to each front wheel, and twisted both dials to the lock position by hand. Only then could you climb back in, work the transfer case lever on the floor, and actually drive all four wheels. There was a real benefit behind all that effort. With the hub set to free, the front axle, drive shaft, and differential did not spin while you cruised down the highway, which reduced wear and saved fuel during the many miles when four-wheel drive was not needed. Ranchers and hunters knew the routine by heart, and the smart ones locked their hubs before they needed them, back at the pavement where the ground was still solid. The ones who forgot ended up kneeling in the mud or the snow, twisting a frozen dial with numb fingers while the wind howled, which is exactly the situation four-wheel drive was supposed to prevent. Through the 1980s and 1990s, automatic locking hubs and then shift-on-the-fly systems took over, letting drivers engage four-wheel drive with a lever or a simple dash knob without ever leaving the cab. Modern trucks handle the whole process electronically in seconds, and many crossovers now shuffle power between the axles without the driver even noticing. Convenient, absolutely. But there was something honest about a truck that made you step outside and shake hands with the weather before it would help you through it. For most of the 20th century, the front bench seat was simply what a truck seat was. One wide cushion stretched from door to door, covered in vinyl or woven cloth with a single bench back behind it. Because the shifter was on the column and the floor was flat, 3 adults could sit comfortably side by side, and on the farm or the job site, a bench often carried more people than that. The bench seat shaped daily life in small ways that people still remember. A crew of 3 rode to work in one cab, with the unlucky middle passenger straddling the driveline hump. Kids slid across the seat on hot vinyl in the summer, and the family dog claimed the middle spot with his head out over the dash. The bench even earned a place in American romance, because a sweetheart could slide over and sit right next to the driver at the drive-in movie, which no center console has allowed since. Bench seats were also practical in ways we forget. The flat cushion doubled as a desk for paperwork, a lunch table at noon, and a bed for a nap during harvest season. But over the decades, buyers began treating trucks like family cars, and they wanted the comforts of one. Bucket seats, big center consoles, cup holders and armrests moved in, and floor shifters returned for sportier automatics. Safety rules made the middle position more complicated as well. Shoulder belts and airbags were designed around individual seating positions, and the wide-open bench slowly lost its place. Today, a front bench is a rare fleet truck option instead of the standard, and the 6-passenger single-cab pickup has nearly vanished from dealer lots. The truck got fancier, but it also got a little less friendly. If old trucks like this are your thing, hit subscribe. American Rewind digs up a piece of forgotten America every week. Now, look at photographs of pickup trucks from the 1960s and 1970s, especially in rural America, and you will spot something in almost every rear window: the gun rack. This was a simple 2- or 3-pronged rack, made of metal, wood, or plastic, mounted horizontally across the back glass of the cab. It held a rifle or a shotgun in plain view, cushioned on rubber-coated hooks right behind the driver's head. In farm country, This was about as controversial as a toolbox. A rancher might need a rifle for coyotes threatening his livestock, and a deer hunter kept his shotgun handy through the season. The rack kept the firearm off the seat and off the dirty floor, secure and easy to reach. Plenty of racks never held a gun at all. People used them for fishing rods, umbrellas, canes, levels, and bundles of survey stakes, because a horizontal rack in the back window turned out to be handy for anything long and awkward. For a while, the gun rack was such a fixture of truck culture that it showed up in country songs and movies as shorthand for rural life. But times changed. Leaving a visible firearm in a parked truck became an invitation for theft, and laws in many states tightened around how guns could be transported and stored. Workplaces and school parking lots banned them outright. Truck owners moved their firearms into locking cases and hidden storage, and the open rear window rack faded away. Today, the racks themselves have become collectibles, and spotting one still loaded with a fishing rod feels like seeing a postcard from another era. The gun rack vanished because the world around the truck changed. The next feature vanished because the truck itself got smarter. Starting an old truck on a cold morning was not an event. It was a ritual. Before electronic fuel injection, pickups breathed through a carburetor, and a cold engine needed a richer mix of fuel to fire up and stay running. That is where the manual choke came in. It was a small knob on the dashboard, usually marked with the letter C, connected by a cable to a plate inside the carburetor. Pull the knob out, and the choke plate closed, feeding the engine the extra fuel it wanted. Every truck had its own personality, and every owner knew the recipe by heart. Maybe it was 2 slow pumps of the gas pedal, choke out halfway, then crank. Maybe it was full choke and a prayer on mornings below zero. Once the engine caught, it ran fast and rough while it warmed, and the driver eased the choke back in a little at a time as the idle smoothed out. Push it in too soon, and the engine stumbled and died. Leave it out too long, and the truck ran rich, wasting gas and fouling spark plugs with black soot. Fathers passed these starting rituals down to their kids like family recipes, and lending your truck to a neighbor always came with a full set of verbal instructions. Then, through the 1980s, electronic fuel injection arrived and changed everything. Computers began measuring air temperature and adjusting the fuel mixture automatically, hundreds of times per second. By the early 1990s, carburetors had essentially disappeared from new American trucks, and the choke knob went with them. Today, you push a button and the engine simply runs, in Miami or in Minnesota. Nobody really misses the stalling, but plenty of folks miss knowing their truck that well. So far, every feature on this list lived inside the cab. The next one changed the very shape of the truck. The earliest pickup trucks all shared the same basic shape out back. A narrow cargo box with the rear fenders bolted on outside the bed. That design became known as the Stepside, named for the small step tucked between the cab and the rear fender, which let you plant a boot and reach over the side of the bed. For decades, this was just what a truck bed looked like. The bed walls were straight and flat inside, since the wheels and fenders lived outside the box, and those big, rounded fenders gave trucks of the 1940s and 1950s their classic curvy character. Then, in the mid-1950s, manufacturers introduced a new idea, the fleetside bed, with smooth outer walls that stretched the full width of the truck. The fenders moved inside the box, creating wheel humps in the bed, but adding valuable cargo width between them. Buyers could suddenly lay sheets of plywood flat between the wheel humps, and the slab-sided look matched the modern styling of the era. Within a few years, the fleetside became the best seller, and the old narrow box turned into the alternative instead of the standard. The Stepside hung on for decades after that, mostly as a style choice. Chevrolet kept building Stepside beds. Ford sold its version as the flare side, and Dodge offered its own take because plenty of buyers just loved the classic look of exposed fenders. But the practical argument was over, and the Stepside share of sales shrank year after year. By the mid-2000s, the last factory Stepside beds quietly left the order sheets. Today, the design lives on at classic truck shows, where those graceful outside fenders remind everyone that pickups were once styled with curves instead of creases. And those rounded fenders were not the only bright metal to disappear from the outside of a pickup. There was a time when the front of a pickup truck wore its strength right out in the open, in the form of a chrome-plated steel bumper. These were heavy bars of real metal, bolted straight to the frame, polished to a mirror shine, and built to take a beating. A truck had one across the front and one across the back, and both of them worked for a living. The rear bumper doubled as a step for climbing into the bed, and many were drilled for a ball hitch to pull a trailer. The front bumper served as a push bar for stubborn equipment and dead vehicles, and out on the ranch, it shoved open more than a few gates. When a chrome bumper met a fence post or a shopping cart, the usual result was a scratch or a small dent, which owners wore like a badge. Sun-faded farm trucks with gleaming, dented chrome bumpers became one of the classic images of rural America. But automotive design moved on. Crash regulations pushed engineers toward bumper systems with energy-absorbing structures, and stylists wanted the bumper blended smoothly into the body. Plastic bumper covers, painted to match the truck, wrapped around modern crash beams and hid them completely. They improved aerodynamics, saved weight, and looked sleek. But they also cracked and scuffed in the same little bumps that old chrome shrugged off. Big chrome steel bumpers held on with trucks longer than anywhere else, surviving on work trims into recent years, but the classic full chrome look has largely faded. On a modern pickup, the strongest part of the truck now hides behind painted plastic. Breaker 19. In the 1970s, that phrase came out of pickup trucks all across America, because the Citizens Band radio had taken over the road. The CB was a two-way radio mounted under the dash, wired to a long whip antenna on the bumper or a mirror mount, with a coiled cord running to a handheld microphone. It let drivers talk to anyone within a few miles on 40 channels, no phone lines and no operators required. Truckers made Channel 19 their highway party line, trading reports on traffic, weather, and speed traps in a colorful slang all their own. Smoky meant police, a bear in the air meant a police aircraft, and your handle was your on-air nickname. During the fuel crisis of 1973, truckers used CBs to organize convoys and find stations that still had diesel, and the radios exploded into a full national craze. Millions of ordinary drivers installed them, and pickup owners were right at the front of the line. CB culture spilled into hit songs and Hollywood movies, and for a while, a whip antenna bouncing above a pickup bed was as common as a radio antenna itself. Out in the country, a CB was more than fun. On remote roads far from any payphone, it was a lifeline for calling out a breakdown or an accident. Then cell phones arrived, and the reason for all that chatter faded fast. Smartphones put traffic reports, weather radar, and a direct line to help in every pocket, and the radio under the dash became a dust collector. Truckers still use CBs today, but the family pickup went quiet. The whip antennas came down, and Channel 19 became a road that most drivers simply forgot. From vent windows to CB radios, these 10 features tell the story of how the American pickup grew from a bare-bones work tool into the comfortable machine sitting in driveways today. Every one of them was somebody's clever solution once, and every one of them earned its retirement. Still, ask anyone who drove those old trucks, and they will tell you that twisting a hub in the snow or easing a choke knob back in on a cold morning made a truck feel like a partner, a machine you knew as well as it knew you. If you enjoyed this American Rewind video, go ahead and watch the next one, and remember to like and subscribe. It really helps a small channel.